Hey everyone, this is Devin. Today I'm going to teach you to build a collapsible menu for your website using only HTML and CSS, no JavaScript whatsoever. Let's go over to the computer. We're going to start here at CodePen, which is an in-browser HTML, CSS, JavaScript playground. What I've done to get us started is I've built some really simple HTML, some really simple markup for a navigation menu. I've got a header element surrounding a nav element surrounding an unordered list containing a few links. Then I'm using a CSS framework called Milligram, which is a really bare bones CSS framework that works without any classes, just with basic HTML. On top of that, I've layered a few of my own styles, just some pretty basic stuff here, a few lines of CSS to make what you see in the bottom pane here. Below the video, I'm going to share a link to this starter project so that if you want to work along, you can start from this same point. Feel free to comb through what I've got so far, take a look at this, and just kind of familiarize yourself with what I've done up to this point if you want to do that. If not, you can just pick up from here and work along with me. Before we get started, a quick explanation of exactly what we're trying to accomplish here. I'm sure you've seen the hamburger menus, the collapsible menus that a lot of websites use for navigation. Most websites don't use it at desktop viewport widths, though they use it when you're on a mobile device or when your browser is narrower. I've pulled up an example here. You can see they've got this navigation across the top. This is what you see if you pull the site up on a desktop computer. If I start narrowing this window, you're going to first lose some elements, and then when we get here, we're going to collapse down to this menu, which contains all the same items, but it's able to collapse so that you're not trying to set aside all that horizontal space that we just don't have anymore. This is often done with some combination of JavaScript and CSS to achieve this. What we are going to do today is we're going to do it with only CSS. It won't be exactly like this one, but it will function pretty much the same. Starting from here, the first thing I want to do is I want to figure out at what width do I want to start breaking this down into a collapsible menu instead of having the horizontal navigation layout. CodePen right there in the middle of the bar above the web page pane that shows the actual rendered output, it's telling me the width of my viewport, which is going to be pretty helpful here. It actually stopped showing that at some point. I'm not entirely clear why, but we're just going to pick somewhere. It doesn't have to be accurate to what we might use on a real page. And you can see here it stops, it goes to a different layout and it stops showing it. So you know what, we're just going to say we want to break at 850. So up until 850, we would like to show the collapsible menu, and then from 850 pixels on, anything wider than that, we're going to show this horizontal navigation that you see now. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a media query. I'm going to say screen and min width 850 pixels. I'm not going to put anything in here yet. And actually, I need to move this down to the bottom. We are using a mobile-first approach here. So what that means is, one, all of our mobile styles are going to be the baseline styles. So right now, these are sort of the styles for the full-size menu. We're going to be shifting some of this around because we want the baseline styles to be the mobile collapsible menu, and then we want our full layout to be inside this media query, which is why we're using min width instead of max width. Mobile first when it comes to styling is the best practice. You always want to have your mobile styles as the baseline styles, and then you want to override that with a media query like this one when you're going to change the layout for wider viewports. We've kind of broken the mobile first paradigm already by writing the full-size navigation menu, but the point of this exercise is to show you how to adapt something like this. In the actual CSS we write, though, we're going to use the mobile styles as the baseline, and then we're going to augment that with the media query and the styles that are contained within that media query. It makes sense since the smaller design is usually going to be simpler by necessity. It kind of makes sense to start there and then layer on new things on top of it with the media queries. I'm going to start by saying, what of the styles we've written, which of these rules are specific to a wider layout? And I can just sort of go through these one at a time and take inventory and see which ones are specific to that layout. You might think that the maximum width of 1200 is specific to that layout, but really we can leave that everywhere because it's fine that we have a maximum width of 1200 pixels universally. That just won't be applied on our smaller devices, smaller viewports. The background we would always want to be the same. I think since we're going to be removing most of the elements from this bar, when we shift over to the collapsible menu, these paddings will probably work just fine. We still do not want any sort of bullets. The display could still be flex, although we probably won't want the default flex direction, which is what we're working with now. The default flex direction is row, but on our smaller devices, we won't be able to have these in a row. We won't be able to have them laid out horizontally. And this is kind of the point of the collapsible menu, so that we can arrange them vertically. So I'm actually going to start here, and I'm going to say flex direction, and we'll say column. This is going to start to look funky. And then I'm going to take this whole thing, because I'm going to need to override that for the larger viewports. I'm going to take this whole thing and change the flex direction to row. And you can see, since we are above 850 pixels wide, it's going to snap back into place. I don't need any of this duplicated, so the only thing I need here is flex direction row. All the rest of that can stay. These margins, the font weight, that's good. The color is not going to change. The decoration is not going to change, I don't think. That's really it for now. So that's the only thing we need to move around in order to make this work. This is where we start to get into the magic of how this technique works. The first thing I'm going to do is I am going to add a checkbox. I need to give it an ID, and I will tell you in a minute why we need that. But we're just going to call this menu toggle. Then I'm also going to want a label. And this is important too, and I'll also describe why momentarily. This label is going to be for menu toggle. This for attribute tells the browser that this label labels the checkbox with the ID menu toggle. What do we want this menu toggle to say, or how do we want it to appear? You might want to put the little hamburger icon in there. If you wanted to do that, you could go grab an SVG and just put the SVG in line. You could just paste it right in there. You could put an image in there if you wanted to. I'm going to go really simple here, and I'm just going to put the word menu. Also, that's not really the color I want, so I'm going to add some styles for this. I can use an attribute selector. With an attribute selector, you just specify an element based on an attribute it has or an attribute plus the value of that attribute. Here I'm selecting an element that has an attribute 4, and the value of that is menu toggle, so that will select this label. I want the color to be black, the same as the menu items. I probably also want to mirror the other styles I'm using with these. So those are the hover text decoration and the pointer. You can see when we move over the word menu here, there's no indication that this is clickable. It would be nice if that also had the pointer like these links get. And that's pretty easy to do. For that, we can do cursor is pointer. And now we need a new selector to do the hover style. I'm going to copy and paste this because it's close to this selector, but not quite. We're just going to add a pseudo class of hover that will style this element only when it is hovered. Let's see if that works. That looks good. We're getting the pointer and we get the hover style of the underline. The reason we're using a label here is because the state of the checkbox is going to determine whether we are showing the navigation menu or not. If the checkbox is checked, we're going to show the navigation. If the checkbox is unchecked, we're going to not show the navigation. CSS has a checked pseudo class, sort of like the hover pseudo class, except it's :checked. And that allows you to select an element that is checked. We can use that to determine if the checkbox is checked or not, and then we can style the list based on that checkbox state. The reason for the label is because we don't actually want to control this on the screen with a checkbox. We don't want to show the user a checkbox and force them to check it or uncheck it in order to activate the menu. The really cool thing about labels is if you associate your label with an element, like we have here using the for attribute, the label will also control that same element. So I can check or uncheck this checkbox by clicking on it, of course, or I can click on the label, and that has the same effect as clicking on the checkbox itself. In order to achieve the look we want, I just want to hide this checkbox. I never want it to be visible. It's really just it's almost like a variable that we're using. It just tracks the state of the menu. Is it shown or is it hidden? I can use an ID selector here and just select the menu toggle, since that is the ID of our checkbox. Then I can just use display none. Even though that checkbox is not being displayed on the screen, and actually we're never going to display that ever, we can still control the state of the checkbox using the label that's associated with that checkbox, and we can still style based on the state of that checkbox. One more thing we're going to do, we don't want this menu button visible, or this menu label rather, visible at all at wider viewports. So I'm going to just grab the same selector so I don't have to type it again. I'm going to bring it down here, and I'm going to say display none. It should go away. Now we're back to what we were looking at when we started this whole thing. So let's see, how can we do this so that, let's change the editor layout. Right now, here's the problem I'm trying to solve. Right now, if we make this narrow enough to trigger our dropdown, we're going to have really small HTML, CSS, and JavaScript panes. So I'm going to flip those over on the side. That makes it a little narrower, and I can just use this to resize it the way we want. So that's our wide viewport navigation. Then once we hit, oh, and actually you can see I'll highlight it on your video, you can see the width on the bar I'm dragging down at the bottom. So now we are in our collapsible menu zone. It's not yet a collapsible menu, but we've got most of the pieces in place. All we need to do at this point is, through CSS, tell the browser to either show or hide that navigation based on the state of the checkbox. Here's how we do it. I'm first going to select the checkbox. I'll use the ID. Menu toggle, and then I want to see if it's checked. But this is not actually what I want to style. I don't need to style the checkbox. That's already completely hidden. But I want to select something else based on that. I want to select this unordered list. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use the plus, which is the sibling selector. This selector means we have the menu toggle, it is checked, and it has a sibling that is the unordered list. And the last thing in here is what we're actually styling. It won't style this unless this is a sibling of a checked widget with the ID of menu toggle. But it will apply these styles that we're writing to the unordered list because it's the last thing in the selector. If it's checked, we want to display it. To figure out how to do that, I'm going to see how, and actually, I'm just going to collapse this JavaScript pane. We're not writing any JavaScript. And I'm going to go ahead and collapse the HTML too, because we're done with that, I think. I want to see how this is displayed already. What is the display property of this unordered list? I believe it is flex. Yes. So that's what we want it to be. And actually, I'm just going to pull this out. The nav-ul, if the menu toggle is checked, then the navigation UL will be display flex. That means we might need a new style here to cover all the other cases. So here, the display is going to be none. We don't want that to show unless this is checked. Just to recap, here's what we did. We took the display property out of the existing nav-ul style, took that out altogether. That was display flex. Moved it down here to our new selector, which only styles the unordered list if it is a sibling of a menu toggle element, an element with an ID of menu toggle that is checked. So that's the only case it's displayed as flex. In every other case, it's going to not be displayed. We can test this right now and see it work. It's already working. So we have our collapsible menu. You may think we're done and we're almost there, but we're not quite. Here is the piece that is missing. If I pull this back out now it's gone. Now our entire navigation is gone. And the reason for that is because this display property is set to none. In order to fix that, we need to come down here and we're going to have to override these display properties for our wider viewport. On the wider viewport, we want the unordered list to always be displayed. We don't care about the state of the checkbox. And I think we can do that right here in this existing nav-ul selector. I'm just going to say display flex. And now it's displayed again. Let's make sure we didn't break the smaller. No, it looks like we're good. All right. Let me cover that last part again. What we did is we set the default state of the nav-ul. The display property is none. So if nothing else is happening, if there are no other cases to consider, then we're not displaying the navigation UL. Here are our exceptions. If the navigation UL is a sibling of a checked element with the ID menu toggle, it will be display flex. If our minimum width is 850, then the new default case for the nav-ul is display flags. Now we have a nice collapsible navigation menu without any JavaScript. That's all there is to it. Thanks for watching my video. If you liked it, please subscribe to the channel and go through some of the back catalog. Check out my videos about how to start your career as a web developer and other videos about technical topics, kind of like this one. Thanks again, and I'll talk to you soon.